Tonight at 10, Boris Johnson under attack for appearing to compare the French government to the Nazis. The Foreign Secretary visiting India accused some European leaders of wanting to punish the UK for leaving the EU.
If Monsieur Hollande wants to administer punishment beatings to anybody who chooses to escape, rather in the manner of some sort of World War II movie, then I don't think that is the way forward.
But at the European Parliament, the Prime Minister of Malta warned that Britain could not be seen to benefit from any Brexit agreement.
We want a fair deal for the United Kingdom, but that deal necessarily needs to be inferior to membership.
We'll have more on the reaction to the government's Brexit plans as HSBC says it's decided to move 1,000 jobs from London to Paris. Also tonight, a special report from the ruins of eastern Aleppo on the likely outcome of the Syrian conflict.
Foreign intervention has transformed this war, and the way it's looking right now, foreigners, not Syrians, will dictate the way the war ends.
Climate scientists declare that 2016 was the warmest year on record. Extra news. How will this new website, funded by a millionaire Eurosceptic, fit into the media landscape?
Rachel Flint on one.
And tributes today to Rachel Hayhoe-Flint, one of the great pioneers of women's sport.
In the South, fighting on the home front, service families say they're not being listened to when it comes to complaints about accommodation. And a plea for better funded policing as a force says it's done all it can to make savings.
Good evening. Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, has been criticised for his choice of language after appearing to compare the French government to the Nazis. He said Britain should not be threatened with punishment beatings in the manner of a World War II movie for wanting to leave the EU. During the day, European leaders have been giving their reactions to Theresa May's speech of yesterday, outlining her Brexit ambitions. The European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, promised to work for good results in the forthcoming talks, as our political editor Laura Kuensberg tells us.
Watch out, chaps. I'm worried about you falling over.
Watch out, Foreign Secretary, more like. It's his job to win friends and influence around the world. On tour in India today.
Do I come and say hello here? How do you
But
do?
as the delicate process of leaving the EU begins, rather indelicate words about our old friends and foes, the French.
If Monsieur Hollande wants to administer punishment beatings to anybody who chooses to escape, rather in the manner of some sort of World War II movie, then I don't think that is the way forward. And I think actually it's not in the interests of our friends and our partners.
From thousands of miles away, he was slammed as crass. Not exactly what you'd expect from a foreign minister, one diplomat told me. Awkward, when back home the Prime Minister is urging everyone to play nice.
The point he made was a reasonable one, but the language has got to be extremely careful in dealing with colleagues and friends.
What does Boris do? He comes up with these extraordinary phrases of which we should all be ashamed.
Boris Johnson's team says he was just making the point that it makes no sense for the rest of the EU to treat Britain harshly. But only yesterday, Theresa May was publicly reminding ministers here at home of the need for discipline. And with a difficult deal ahead, Britain needs all the friends it has. Language matters, but it's the words and attitudes of European leaders that will prove vital. Yesterday, the Prime Minister appealed to her EU counterparts, urging them to behave as good friends, even as we leave. The arch-European Jean-Claude Juncker, who leads the Commission which will manage the deal, was suing for peace.
We are not in an hostile mood. We want a fair deal with Britain and a fair deal for Britain, but a fair deal means a fair deal for the European Union.
Yet Europe's leaders are in no mood to let Britain divide and conquer. Their goal right now is sticking together. We now have a clearer idea of what Britain wants, Angela Merkel said. The most important thing is that Europe is not divided. And in public and in private, here's the reality. Whatever the UK asks for, the rest of the European Union will not do a deal where the terms of trade are as cushy outside as in.
We want a fair deal for the United Kingdom, but that deal necessarily needs to be inferior to membership.
Are you playing hardball, Prime Minister?
She may well smile. Her speech yesterday pleased most of her party. But Theresa May is still under attack for not giving MPs enough of a say.
It's not so much the Iron Lady as the Irony Lady.
I've got a plan. He doesn't have a clue.
Next Tuesday, it's over to the courts, who could force the government to give detail, much more detail, to Parliament before the technical process of extricating ourselves from the EU begins. In these negotiations, it will not always seem that ministers are in charge. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's take stock in a moment. We'll talk to our business editor, Simon Jack, at the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. First to Damien Grammaticus, our Europe correspondent in Strasbourg. What did you make of the responses there today, Damien?
Well, Hugh, I think two things. Theresa May's plan depends on achieving a far-reaching trade deal with the EU. Now, there are voices in the UK who say we're already in the single market, we have free trade, that should be easy. What EU leaders have been saying consistently is that this is going to be a very, very difficult negotiation because they say Theresa May has prioritised a political decision to prevent the freedom of movement of people and so leave the single market. Outside it, they say, access will be much more limited. They say this is not about punishing the UK, it's simply a consequence of decisions the UK has taken. The second thing, few here think the time frame of 2 years is really achievable. And the reason for that, I think, is that they say there is the exit negotiation to agree first, and then there is the question of the future trade deal. Malta's Prime Minister today said EU leaders have not decided if they will let the UK start talking a trade deal straight away until it has settled the terms of its exit, including possibly a bill for billions and billions of pounds. Hugh.
OK, Damien, thanks very much. Let's go straight to Simon in Davos. Theresa May arriving there today, Simon, on the day that HSBC had some rather bad news for the City of London.
Yeah, she's going to arrive, Hugh, to the news that HSBC was not bluffing when it said that it would move 1,000 of its highly paid bankers from London to Paris if the UK left the single market. She made it very clear that's what's going to happen. They made it very clear that that is now their plan, and they'll take 20% of their European banking revenue with them. They weren't the only ones. UBS told me today, the chairman told me today, that they could move up to 1,000 workers from London to probably Frankfurt. Now, many people will say, so what? But I think there's two important messages here. Two big banks have decided that London, outside the single market, is not the optimal place for them to provide services to their European clients. And the other one is, these are very highly paid people. And whether you like that or not, they get paid hundreds of thousands of pounds each and pay an awful lot of income tax. So with the revenue from the bank they're taking and the income tax they're taking away, there will be a hit to the exchequer. And also, lots of other banks have contingency plans. And for these two, these are not contingency plans anymore. They're plans, and they're becoming a reality.
Simon, thanks very much. Simon Jack there in Davos, and Damien Forrest there in Strasbourg. Now, the United Nations says it believes 40,000 people have returned to their homes in eastern Aleppo, the city devastated by years of civil war. Most of them are living on aid in very difficult conditions. Aleppo is Syria's largest city. It became a major battleground in the summer of 2012. As recently as August of last year, this was the picture: a city divided with the regime forces in the west and the rebels over there to the east. But government forces did cut off the rebel supply lines, and in just a few months they were able then to take full control of the city. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, has been to eastern Aleppo, and he sent this special report.
This is the calm after the storm. The final battle for Aleppo swept through the city like a man-made, malevolent tornado. All sides in this war were prepared to destroy Aleppo to possess it. In the end, the firepower of the regime and its Russian and Iranian allies was too much for the fractious rebel coalition that controlled East Aleppo. This city is the key to northern Syria. Right across the country, rebels who are still fighting are on the defensive. The battle for Aleppo lasted 4 years. More than 200,000 civilians were trapped in the heat of the fight. Attacks on civilians by any side in the war are crimes if it can be proved they were deliberate. Zakaria Mohammed Juma lost his leg in East Aleppo 3 months ago. At a clinic run by the International Committee of the Red Cross, he's being measured for a prosthesis. Rehabilitation is painful. When you can't walk, supporting a family is even harder. It will take years and billions to rebuild. The east side of Aleppo and much of the old city is in ruins. With a photo of his clothes shop, Salah Ajam stood in front of where it used to be. I've seen this much damage elsewhere in Syria, but never in such a wide area. Abu Mahmoud is one of the first to return to his neighborhood. If only they'd take away the rubble, he said, all the neighbors would come back. This corpse was still lying on the road a month after the battle. More are certain to be buried in collapsed buildings. Abu Mohammed, collecting firewood, showed where a mortar fragment had hit him. Look, he said, they took out my spleen, a kidney, and part of my intestines. I've had many operations. In every queue for emergency aid, there are tragedies. Gossoon, who's 12, has seen more than anyone should in a lifetime. Her grandmother, Abdu, is using all the strength she has left to care for her surviving grandchildren.
My daughter's 15-year-old girl and her son, who was 7, were killed. My son's 3-year-old daughter lost a leg. Another grandson, aged 7, lost a hand. My family's houses were all destroyed.
We don't know what's hidden in our future. The war has damaged all of us. My cousin lost her leg. I saw with my own eyes my other cousin, his intestines were out of his body.
President Assad's resurgence in Aleppo means talk about forcing him out sounds more hollow than ever. He is the strongest he's been since the war started. The empty, ruined, silent streets on the former front lines feel oppressive. No one has tried to move back here. It's haunted by violence and death. That is a homemade mortar, designed and built by the rebels, and in itself, it's a fearsome weapon, but it is nothing compared to the power of the Russian Air Force and the military know-how of the Iranians and their Lebanese allies. Foreign intervention has transformed this war, and the way it's looking right now, foreigners, not Syrians, will dictate the way the war ends. The sun sets in Aleppo on a dark, cold and broken place. It feels like a post-war city, but this is not a post-war country. Syria has a fragile, partial truce. For the first time, the president and his allies can smell victory, but they are not there yet. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Aleppo.
A glimpse of life in eastern Aleppo today with our Middle East correspondent there, Jeremy Bowen. Now, thousands of British holidaymakers are being flown home from the Gambia after a state of emergency was declared there. The Foreign Office is advising people to avoid all but essential travel to the country because of a risk of unrest. President Yahya Jammeh is refusing to accept the result of last month's presidential elections, in which he was defeated. His elected successor, Adama Barrow, was due to be inaugurated tomorrow, and Senegal has said that its military forces will enforce the handover if that is necessary. Our correspondent Umaru Fofana reports now from the Gambian capital, Banjul.
It's not a very good news. It's basically that we are going to evacuate everyone back home today. Today? Yes, today.
Leaving in droves, not as they came, not as they had anticipated. Thousands of European tourists, mostly from the UK, being flown back home on special flights. Some had been here for only a couple of days, which explains their reaction.
Asking us to leave is unnecessary, I think, at the moment. But I understand that we need to do it.
To me, it feels stupid because this will all be over within 24 hours to 48 hours.
They are not the only ones leaving. Thousands of Gambians are also streaming out, many to neighboring Senegal. They fear a West African military intervention is imminent. Troops are said to be massing on the border, a Nigerian warship is on its way, and its air force is on standby. The African Union says effective tomorrow, it will not recognize Jammeh as this country's leader. Ahead of the anticipated military action and the planned inauguration of Adama Barrow, President Yahya Jammeh declared a state of public emergency.
Behind me here is the National Stadium of the Gambia, the planned venue for the inauguration on Thursday of Adama Barrow as the country's next president. He has tweeted defiantly for neighboring Senegal, where he's expected to come from, that he will be here tomorrow for his inauguration.
Jammeh withdrew from the British Commonwealth in 2013 amid frosty relations. He has now ruled this country for 22 years, controversially winning 4 elections. It took a coalition of 7 political parties led by Adama Barrow to defeat him in December, but he insists those elections were flawed.
Our position is very, very clear. I am president-elect. We advise the president to cooperate.
If he doesn't cooperate?
We believe that he will cooperate.
However this pans out, this tiny West African nation has a huge task ahead. Many people have been killed, jailed or disappeared in the last 2 decades. Their families are calling for justice. Responding to such demands could determine how this current crisis is brought to an end. Umaru Fofana, BBC News, The Gambia.
Unemployment has fallen to its lowest level for more than a decade. Official figures show the number of people out of work in the UK in the 3 months to November was down by 52,000 to 1.6 million. Average earnings rose by 2.7% compared with the same period last year. But the figures also show that since July, the total number of people in work in the UK has stopped growing. Now, in his final news conference at the White House before he leaves office in 2 days' time, President Obama has underlined the importance of accountability and freedom of the press in a healthy democracy. President-elect Trump has signalled that he's considering changes to the traditional White House news briefings, prompting concern in some quarters that accountability might be more limited from now on. Our North America editor, John Sopel, was at the news conference. He sent this report.
For one last time, Barack Obama came to the White House briefing room to joust with the press.
Good afternoon, everybody.
But amid reports that his successor wants to limit access and regularly accuses journalists of being dishonest and liars, the outgoing president spoke of the importance of a strong and free media.
You're not supposed to be sycophants. You're supposed to be skeptics. You're supposed to ask me tough questions. You're not supposed to be complimentary. But you're supposed to cast a critical eye on folks who hold enormous power.
This picture was released today of Donald Trump preparing his inaugural address. Barack Obama was asked what advice he'd give his successor. On this, he steered a diplomatic course.
This is a job of such magnitude that you can't do it by yourself. You are enormously reliant on a team. That's probably the most useful advice, the most constructive advice that I've been able to give him.
And then the final question. Come on, Mr. President, are you really as sanguine as you're saying publicly about Donald Trump taking over?
This is not just a matter of no drama Obama. This is what I really believe. It is true that behind closed doors I curse more than I do publicly. And sometimes I get mad and frustrated like everybody else does. But at my core, I think we're going to be okay. Thank you very much, press corps. Good luck.
Barack Obama will spend the next year writing and being around more for Michelle and his 2 daughters. He says he won't be a backseat driver, but he's given this warning. If he sees things that he really doesn't like, then he will speak out. It seems that Friday won't be the last we see of Barack Obama. But in the meantime, there's a new home to get ready. Moving house is said to be one of life's most stressful experiences. But when you've been president for 8 years, making life and death decisions, where to hang your favourite picture is probably unlikely to keep you awake at night. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Scientists at the American Space Agency NASA say that 2016 was the hottest year since records began over a century ago. Average global temperatures edged ahead of 2015 and are now 1.1 degrees higher than pre-industrialized levels. It's the 3rd consecutive year that this record has been broken, according to the people at NASA. And scientists believe that the El Niño weather phenomenon did play a role, but increasing levels of greenhouse gases were the main factor in driving up temperatures, as our science correspondent Rebecca Morell explains.
Our planet is warming fast. And the latest data suggests that 2016 was a record-breaking year. This winter, parts of the Arctic have had a heat wave. Temperatures were above freezing when they should have been far below. While Australia's Great Barrier Reef was transformed to this, vast swathes of coral were killed off as the waters warmed.
2015 was the warmest year on record up until now, so 2016 has just beaten that, and it's beaten that by about 0.12 degrees Celsius, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in terms of the year-to-year variations, it's actually huge.
Part of this rise was caused by an El Niño event, a warm ocean current that disrupts the world's weather. But scientists say greenhouse gases were the main driver. This shows how global temperatures have increased since the Industrial Revolution. The bigger the circle, the hotter the year. And the latest data collected by NASA and meteorological agencies around the world suggests 2016 is the 3rd year in a row to break records. The global temperature is edging ever closer towards some worrying figures. Scientists say a rise of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels could lead to dangerous impacts around the world. So a lower limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius was set by the Paris Climate Agreement, a global deal that came into force last year. But with carbon dioxide at record levels, scientists say this is a temperature threshold we're on course to surpass. To tackle global warming, the world is being urged to move away from fossil fuels like coal. But in the US, Donald Trump has said he wants to revive the industry and has threatened to pull America out of the Paris Climate Agreement. The woman who brokered the deal is concerned.
If the US chooses to exit the road and the path that is being pursued by every other country in the world, it is only going to damage itself because it will become less competitive. We are moving toward a decarbonized society.
All eyes will now be on this year's data. Already scientists forecast that 2017 won't be as warm because the El Niño event is over. But they say longer term, unless action is taken, the Earth will continue to heat up. Rebecca Morell, BBC News.
A disabled man has won his case at the Supreme Court after a dispute over wheelchair space on a bus. It means that bus drivers will have more to do to accommodate wheelchair users. Doug Paulley brought his case after he was refused entry to a first group bus back in 2012 when a mother with a pushchair refused to move. Our Disability Affairs correspondent Nikki Fox takes up the story.
It's taken nearly 5 years of legal battles to get to this point.
How are you feeling, Doug? How are you feeling?
But finally, Doug Paulley has had his day in the highest court in the country. All 7 judges agreed that the bus company's policy of requesting, not requiring a person to vacate the wheelchair space was unlawful. But it's not quite as clear-cut, as the judgment doesn't go as far as insisting someone move from the space.
I'm really pleased with the result. I mean, I'm aware that some people won't be pleased. It's not gone as far as some people would like, or it has gone too far as other people would like. But, you know, in the end, this is about disabled people's right to access to travel on the bus, and hopefully today has been at least a step in the right direction.
This all began back in 2012 when Doug was unable to catch a bus because the space for wheelchairs was occupied by a mum and her pushchair. She refused to move, which meant Doug couldn't get on. The bus operator First Group admit that following today's verdict, they may have to amend the training they provide staff, but they are pleased their drivers won't have to force people off the bus.
We really welcome the fact that the court has confirmed that a driver is not required to remove a passenger from a bus if they are refusing to move from this space. That's really important for drivers to have that clarity.
The impact of today's judgment will have much wider implications that span further than just buses. Any service provider or company that has a dedicated space for disabled people, now that could be a supermarket disabled bay or an accessible toilet in a restaurant, they will have to make sure that wheelchair users get priority. But not all wheelchair users agree.
I won't go in a bus and take women with the prams. You know, I am disabled, right, but I am still a man, and you know, this just feels not right.
But what about mums with babies? It's not quite as simple as wheelchairs versus pushchairs.
It's better off if it just remains a grey area for people to use the common sense.
However nuanced, today's Supreme Court ruling does pave the way for a closer look at legislation when it comes to prioritising access for wheelchair users. Nikki Fox, BBC News.
Arron Banks, the millionaire who financed the campaign to leave the European Union, is now turning his attention to the media. And tomorrow he'll be launching a news website called westmonster.com, owned jointly by a former press officer to Nigel Farage. And they say they will bypass the traditional media and speak directly to voters concerned with issues such as immigration. Our media editor, Amal Rajan, has this exclusive report.
This woman is not your president.
Just screaming failure, screaming weakness.
Alternative news is watched by millions of Americans. Fueled by social media, some of these websites have a bigger following than mainstream networks.
They are complete, pathetic maggots!
Donald Trump openly courted this new media to energise his voter base in last year's election.
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you stay categorical?
You are fake news.
Arron Banks, the man who bankrolled the Leave campaign, was one of the first Brits to meet Mr. Trump after his win.
And what's the 503 billion? That's the total amount of money we've sent to the EU since we joined up.
Mr. Banks put nearly £7 million into last year's referendum, thought to be the biggest political donation in modern British history. Now Britain's newest media baron is launching an anti-establishment website.
I think the internet and social media has changed the world, and that the mainstream media, however you want to describe it, is lagging a long way behind the way you communicate, and I think we intend to shake things up a bit.
Called Westmonster, the site is co-owned by 27-year-old Michael Heaver. Nigel Farage's former spin doctor wants to bring the viral energy that Mr. Trump harnessed to the UK.
What you've seen obviously is a multitude of different right-wing sites be set up. They've had tremendous success. It shows that there's clearly a demand, and we want to be that in this country. We want to be there speaking to people in a language they understand, in a way they understand, about issues they care about.
3 years ago, nearly 60% of us got our news primarily from newspapers, but that's now fallen to just 35%. And meanwhile, social media has risen from less than a quarter and is poised to overtake newspapers. Before the digital era, most of us got our news from a few generally trusted organisations. But these days, we get our information from wildly different and sometimes unreliable sources. Nowadays, you can find your own facts to suit your own opinions. And for some, that's a threat to all of us. Catherine Viner edits The Guardian. She believes some new forms of media could undermine democracy.
I think citizens need good information to make decisions about their lives and to help them understand the kind of world they're in, and perhaps to help them build the kind of world they want to live in. And without good information, without facts and without public interest journalism, that's just much harder to find.
An alternative news ecosystem is heading to Britain.
These people cannot rule over us!
But in the digital age, the truth is vulnerable. The news once aimed to unite us. Perhaps, thanks to technology, it now divides us instead. Amal Rajan, BBC News.
Rachel Heyhoe-Flint, a pioneer in the world of women's cricket, has died at the age of 77. The former England captain was the first woman elected to the MCC's full committee and became the first female sports presenter on British television. As our correspondent Catherine Downs tells us now, her life and career were marked by a series of notable achievements.
Women's cricket as it was, when Rachel Heyhoe-Flint was captain of England, just setting out on her campaign for change. Even before her playing days were over, she was a pioneer, organising the first Women's World Cup in 1973 and then in 1976, leading England out to face Australia in the first ever women's match to be played at Lord's.
I think there was a sort of reticence and nervousness that perhaps the women might take over altogether and that there might be rape and pillage of the members in the luncheon intervals or something like that. We might not present an acceptable face of cricket. And I actually cried as I walked out onto the pitch, and it was the most incredible feeling.
After 12 years as England captain, Rachel Heyhoe-Flint went on to become one of the MCC's first female honorary life members, a member of the ECB board, and she was made a baroness. She used her influence and celebrity to give women's cricket a higher public profile.
I've got messages coming in from members of the current England women's team. The opportunities they have now as professional sportswomen don't come by chance. They come through years of devoted, tireless work from people like Rachel.
In later life, she became vice president of Wolverhampton Wanderers, pouring her energy into the football club's work in the communities around her hometown. But cricket remained her first love, and the field in which she shone as a talent and as a trailblazer.
The tributes today to Rachel Heyhoe-Flint, who's died at the age of 77. Quick reminder that Newsnight's coming up on BBC Two. Here's Kirsty.
Tonight, IMF boss Christine Lagarde gives her verdict on the Prime Minister's Brexit strategy. And will Trump the populist become Trump the tyrant? We hear from Plato. Join me now on BBC Two.
That's Newsnight with Kirsty here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.